Hello, my name is Iles and I run Iles Tours, and today we're going to talk about the rivers of Newcastle. So right now I'm standing on Dean Street, and actually underneath our feet right now there flows a river, and that river has had two names over its history. It's been called the Dean Burn and it's been called the Lort Burn, and it starts actually in two locations just to the north of us in Newcastle. So in Leazes Park, where we today have the Victorian boating lake, that's actually one of the springs of the river, and it flows down until it goes to where the monument is today. The second tributary of the Dean Burn is actually where St Andrew's Church is, and where St Andrew's Church is, that originally actually started as an Anglo-Saxon church in the vicinity of where Newcastle is today. And the reason why the church was actually built in that location was because of the stream there, because it aided with baptism in the early Anglo-Saxon period of the local population. So the Dean Burn actually flowed down through Newcastle, and it was very important in Newcastle's early history because it provided a location in the heart of Newcastle where you would have this defence to the east. So you had the castle on the prominent rocky outcrop where today we have the modern Castle Keep and the Vermont Hotel, but just to the east of it you would have the Dean Burn flowing down here, which was a fast-flowing medieval river right here. Now alongside that, during the Middle Ages, it was actually renamed. So it went from being called the Dean Burn to being called the Lort Burn. And in Scandinavian languages, the Lort Burn actually means rubbish, waste or feces. So this was an open sewer in the heart of Newcastle. It was not a pleasant place to be whatsoever, because the population of Newcastle would just take their rubbish, pour it in here, and it was just vile and it flowed down. Now slightly further up where there was Anderson Place, the Dean Burn, or the Lort Burn as it was called as well, was actually really pleasant. It was a beautiful stream flowing down through the Anderson's grounds, which was very green and were considered a beautiful part of Newcastle. And again, if you went slightly further up, you'd go outside of Newcastle, when it would again revert to being much like a Northumbrian river or a Northumbrian stream going through the countryside. So it's a very different image of what you would have if you go to the north of where Newcastle is today, to what you would have here on Dean Street. Now the Dean Burn was actually an open river right up until the late 1700s, when Nathaniel Clayton, John Clayton's father, actually culverts it underground. And when he culverts it underground, we get the creation of Dean Street as we see it today. And Dean Street was originally had two phases. So you'd have Lower Dean Street, which is what we call Dean Street today, and there was Upper Dean Street, which was created when the Granger town was created by Richard Granger and John Clayton. So when Upper Dean Street was created, it remained that for a short period of time until they built Earl Grey's monument. And when they actually built Earl Grey's monument, Upper Dean Street was actually renamed Grey Street. So that's where we get the meaning of the names today. Now we actually know that the Dean Burn still flows underneath our streets today, because what happened was of something back in 2012, and we call it Thunder Thursday, where we had, I believe, the equivalent of around 2 months worth of rain in a couple of days. So when all of this rain was coming down here, most of the drains in the area actually empty into the culverted river underneath our feet. And so they hit the Tyne, the pressurized water, and the Tyne was already overflowing. It had nowhere to go. So it backfired, and all the way up here, Dean Street, the water was pressurized, and where we're standing, there's actually a manhole cover. And this manhole cover was actually blown off, and there was a 3-story high plume of water right here. So that actually shows you what happens when you take a river and you force underground. And when many people think of underground rivers, they'll think of the rivers of London underneath the feet there. But here in Newcastle, there are 3 of them. And we'll talk about the 2 others in just a second. So where we're standing right now, this is the location where the Pandon Dean would have actually been. And the Pandon Dean flowed north-south from roughly where the Great North Museum Hancock is and the Great North Road, all the way down through the heart of where is now Newcastle to the quayside where we're standing now. And it was considered an area of amazing natural beauty. It was a location where the people of Newcastle would go for an out-of-city break. You'd go for fresh air, you'd walk through this beautiful valley, much like Jesmond Dean today, but much closer to the city. And it was just a place of real relaxation for the populace of Newcastle. So they'd come down here, they'd walk through the Dean, and they absolutely loved it as a location in the heart of Newcastle. But unfortunately for the Pandon Dean, the early industrialists in the late 1700s, early 1800s considered it in the way of progress. So they actually put together a plan and they filled it in. So the Pandon Dean, over the course of around 20 years, was entirely lost to Newcastle. They filled it in, and this whole location, which would have been in the heart of Newcastle, this beautiful green space, was actually filled in. And you can see actually how effective this is, because where the modern civic centre is today, Northumbria University, the Central Motorway, all of that would have actually been the Pandon Dean. So where you're walking down through the heart of Newcastle now, or you're walking across where St Thomas's is near the Haymarket, that whole location would have been the valley. And today it's actually really quite flat, and you can't see a difference really in the height of the ground between that and as you walk towards the east end of Newcastle, or as you walk down Northumberland Street. So it really shows you the effect of what people can do over history. And the Pandon Dean was again culverted, and there's a small exit pipe roughly behind us where the law courts are, and that exit pipe just flows into the Tyne and shows you where the last remaining bit of the Pandon River flowed. So it's interesting to see what effect we can have on the natural world around us. So right here we're standing on the location of the third of the rivers we're going to talk about today, and this is the Skinner Burn. And the Skinner Burn roughly flows through up between where the Life Centre is just on my right hand side here and the Jury's Inn on my left hand side. And in many ways in the past and in the present age as well, it's actually the most forgotten of Newcastle's rivers. In the past it was actually the boundary between the town of Newcastle and the township of Elswick just across the way. So you'd have this border territory between the people of Elswick and the people of Newcastle. Alongside that, it's actually, because it's been culverted underneath the ground here, you can't really see the effect of the river, and especially when you're standing around here, no one would ever know that there's actually a river flowing from the north to the south along this line. Back in the Middle Ages and in the industrial period, it would have been far more prevalent because of the fact you'd have the Whitefriars Monastery just past where the Life Centre is past here, and also the Hawthorne Works as well. And the river still flows here underneath the ground here today, and we really hope we've been able to tell you something about the rivers of Newcastle. So as always, please like, favourite, subscribe, share this with your friends, and we look forward to telling you more about Newcastle in the near future.